We live in a society where there are plenty of people going to bed without enough food at night. It's a climate change issue. It's a financial issue, both personal and an economic issue. When you hear a stat like that, where it's almost half of the food's going to waste and the amount of people going to bed hungry, like it's crazy.
Yeah, it's senseless. And you know what's really interesting about this? Anytime I talk about food waste, people make the assumption that it's the grocery stores and the restaurants that are wasting food. Restaurants typically are very good about food waste because they can't afford to be wasting food. The largest percentage, I think it's around 30 to 40%, is in consumer homes. And when you really do think about it, it's so easy to waste food. I think we're in such a culture where we're go, go, go. I find it myself. I barely have time to plan meals for the week. And you head to the grocery store and you have all these good intentions. You're grabbing food off the shelf. Maybe you have a family. And you get home and then at the end of the week, the food has gone bad because you maybe got takeout or something happened that week. So it happens a lot easier than we think. And I do not want to blame consumers again. I am no perfect person. Even the scrappy a person still has food waste. It's just about if we can do our best, I think we'll all benefit from it.
Yeah, and I don't want to go in the rabbit hole of the classic version of the most of climate change is coming from 50 corporations.
Yeah.
So it's
exactly.
What can you do as an individual? I'm the same way where, obviously I'm budget conscious. I'm your budget girl. I also, love food, but there are, my partner could come in here right now and tell you how much food ends up getting wasted accidentally just because it gets buried at the back of the fridge. I forget about it. To your point, go to the grocery store and I have every intention on cooking in and then I end up, I have a bunch of events that I forgot about where I'm going to get dinner before or after. And it's the same thing. So before we talk about specific recipes, just in shopping or how you set up your refrigerator, what can we be doing? And I'm really asking, what can I be doing to make sure that I cut down on the food waste and be intentional with what I'm actually purchasing?
So the number one thing that everybody can do that is really simple is avoid the food that is going to be wasted from ever coming into your home. So that requires meal planning. And this can be so simple. You do not need a fancy app. You don't need a cookbook. You really don't need anything other than a piece of paper and a pen. And what I like to do is just write down Monday to Friday, breakfast, lunch, and dinner. If you're not a huge planner, you can leave this really loose, but write down maybe 3 meals that you would probably like to cook in the week. I like to write down, okay, I'm going to make overnight oats, maybe a pasta on Wednesday. I'll have the leftovers for lunch on Thursday. Then once you make this list, you're going to create a shopping list based on your meal plan, which I hope took you about 10 minutes. And once you make a shopping list, you're not heading to the grocery store yet. You're going to look in your fridge and pantry because so often we're double buying. Because again, we're just speeding around the house like crazy people and then into the grocery stores. So shop your fridge and pantry, see what items you already have on hand or what items are needing to be used up, and then head to the grocery store with your list. Try not to get distracted and buy random things. And when you come back, one really good tip is to do a little bit of meal prep. So if you can prep things, maybe slice up your bell peppers, create sauces, make the cooking easier for you during the week. And there's a huge conversation here to be had about food waste and health, because I think if we're going to be intentionally reducing our food waste, I really think that requires meal planning. And if you start meal planning and you start cooking the food that you're buying, you're ultimately going to start eating healthier, which is awesome too. It's a win-win-win. Then once you get the food home, a lot of it comes down to food storage, right? So one big one I see a lot of people waste is their spinach. So they'll buy a well-intentioned box of spinach. They're like, I'm going to have spinach smoothies or salads all week. And I mean, I've done it myself. And then the spinach slowly is staring at you every day at the back of the fridge. And to keep it longer, I recommend putting a paper towel or clean cloth to absorb some of the moisture, and then don't wash it until you're actually going to eat it. And then additionally, if you do get to a point where that spinach is wilting, there's so much you can do with it. So you can put it in freezer bags, you can blend it up with some coconut water and then freeze in ice cubes so you have spinach veg bombs to go in your smoothies. Another big one is herbs. People have a real problem with cilantro, it seems. So you can store that like a bouquet in your fridge, or you can also wrap in a moist paper towel to keep it fresh. Celery and carrots you can chop and store in water to keep them nice. And you can bring celery and carrots back to life too when they go limp. As long as there's no signs of spoilage or mold, you can soak them in water. Iceberg lettuce as well, that's a good trick. Potatoes you want to keep in a dry, cool place like a cellar or a garage. And once you learn how to store food, I think I have a whole section for this in my book. You can also just Google it. But once you learn how to store food, it can last considerably longer. But when in doubt, before you see mold and you think like, oh, I'm not going to get to this, bread is a big one. Bread is the number one wasted food in the world. Freeze it. For your freezer is your best friend. And one thing I want to say about frozen food too is there's this misconception that when you're buying frozen that it's somehow unhealthier
Not as healthy.
than fresh. And in reality, frozen berries is a great example of this. And I live in Canada where the food is often like all of our berries are from Mexico. So you think about how many days it took for the berries to get here. And the frozen berries have actually been harvested and then frozen almost immediately. So oftentimes they'll be more nutrient dense than the fresh. Then if you're buying frozen berries, you're taking the guilt away because you know they're just as healthy, if not more nutrient dense than the fresh. You're going to have a lot longer life to them, more use for them in your smoothies or whichever else that you're making. So freezer's your best friend. Food storage, meal planning. That's like the low-hanging fruit, for lack of a better term, that is going to get you 90% there to reducing your food waste.
I love all of those. I was literally writing down the things that I do when I am responsible about it that help. I think one of them is having like a well-stocked pantry. It's like, it's so helpful when you don't know what to cook and you're just like, okay, I need to go out and buy stuff. No, if you have a well-stocked pantry, you can make almost anything. The other thing I really try to do is I am less planning than I probably should be, but I do the like, oh, this is about to go bad, so I'm using it tonight. Like if I have cauliflower that I know is about to go bad, it's like, okay, I'm making cauliflower tacos, or I'm making cauliflower with some sort of like spread, like a harissa hummus situation on the bottom. The other thing that I got caught up in, especially in my early 20s, I'm from Seattle. We're a Costco, like Costco runs in our blood here in the Pacific Northwest. Like if Costco called me and they're like, we need a kidney, I'd be like, which one? Like I love Costco more than anything, but I was a single woman shopping at Costco and buying things in bulk. And I still do this sometimes. I got an Instacart thing from Costco this weekend and I bought a bag of carrots. If you're watching on YouTube, that was this big. It was like this long, this big, massive. So now I'm thinking to myself, how am I going to use all of these things? So I think there are some things, if you're cooking for one or even cooking for two, that Costco's really helpful for, like their toilet paper and their rotisserie chickens. But like, I can't use as many carrots as I'm trying to buy in this period of time. So yeah, I'm either freezing them, which I love that, or I'm just thinking strategically about when to buy them. And then the other thing I wrote down that I need to be better about, but when I do, speaking of the carrots, is like cutting things to make them ready to eat. Because something about like looking at a whole carrot with all of its hair and the tips, I'm just like, no, I don't want to eat that. But like, I'm a little child. I'm a fucking child. If I cut that up and it looks like baby carrots right off the get-go, like I'm going to eat it. So that's a couple of the things I love to do.
Yeah, that ties right into this health conversation that we're talking about too, is that like, if you're going to be intentional about your food waste, you're going to find you probably are automatically eating healthier if you're prepping that food. And when I worked a regular 9 to 5 back at the hospital, I was huge into meal prepping. And this isn't for everyone, but I would really like make it. I'm huge into soups and stews. Canadian weather, horrible. So it's like 8 months of the year, it's soup season. And I would make a huge batch of soup and throw every vegetable known to man in there on a Sunday. And then I would have it like Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, sometimes even Thursday. So once you actually take the time to prep the ingredients that you buy, they're just so much more consumable. And you're less likely to like fly through the drive-thru on the way to work when you have something prepped.
Or reach for, I love chips. I'll continue to eat chips. But like if my carrots are cut, I'm most likely to reach for them. Or if my berries have been like washed and opened, like I'm more likely to reach for those as a snack rather than my Takis for the 7th time this week. So, yeah. one of the things I am really excited to talk with you about, and it's going to take a little bit of backstory to get into it, but I think that you'll really appreciate. I was very similar to you. I was the chicken tenders, tater tots. Well, for me, it was chicken tenders. That was the version of like that's all I can cook. I just throw them in the oven. And then it was a lot of the people I dated, like a lot of the men I dated either had like culinary backgrounds or like were really good home chefs. My friends were good chefs. And so I started learning a lot, and then I watched way too much Food Network. So I got to the point where like, I like to think I'm a pretty fucking good cook. My partner now was the very much like, I cook for sustenance. It doesn't really need to taste good. It just needs to happen. And so over the past 2 years of us dating, there's been a really cool version of him where, you know, he is learning how to cook. He's learning all of the things on Food Network where he's like, oh, I know how to do that. Or this is a thing that I know now. The barrier to entry here is he will bring out a cookbook and he'll look at the recipe and he'll follow it to an absolute T. And I used to do this early in my days too, and I would get mad at people in my life who didn't follow the recipe because I'm like, no, the recipe says this, we need to use this. But what often happens is any sort of recipe book I won't have that certain ingredient. And rather than feeling like, oh, I need to go out and buy this thing that I'm maybe only going to use once, or that just an extra trip to the grocery store, I end up subbing it for something else. Or I, don't measure my spices exactly because I know what things should taste like. So I really wanted your perspective as someone who is a cookbook writer, but also committed to scrappy cooking. How can people think about recipes in a more flexible way, understanding that you can make something without 100% following the recipe, especially considering that like vegetable substitution is actually really easy with a lot of things?
I love this question because it really speaks to kind of my mission, which is to really empower people to learn to cook and then have the flexibility to use up the food they have in their fridge. And it's actually how I designed my new cookbook. Is I have probably about 25 recipes that are earmarked as kitchen raid recipes, and they are identical to what you're talking about, where you can flex in whatever vegetables you have in your fridge. So as opposed to calling for like 1 bell pepper, it will say like 1 cup of chopped vegetables. I use X, Y, and Z. You could use blah, 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 or whatever you have on hand. And so if somebody's listening and they're new to cooking, I know from being a recipe creator that I get questions, probably so many messages every day asking if they can make substitutions in recipes. And oftentimes they'll be like, can I sub sweet potato for butternut squash? And I'm like, 100%. So I will say in my career, 99% of the people that ask this question, the answer is yes, when it's a substitution for a vegetable. And you want to look at like vegetables that are similar. So like a butternut squash and a sweet potato and a yellow potato, they all have like a similar texture. They're going to go great in whatever you're making. And it kind of goes back to what I talked about earlier. I think plant-based cooking is a really great way to kind of enter into this realm of learning how to become an intuitive cook because the stakes are so low. Like really, you're dealing with plants. You're not going to probably overcook them to the point where you won't be able to consume it. You're probably not going to undercook it to the point where you can't consume it. It's really easy to play around and get fun. And I think that so much of it comes from just, like you said, your partner. It's like we take it too seriously and we're looking at it so literally, but we need to have fun with it. It's supposed to be fun. It's supposed to be enjoyable. And I really find often cooking, once you get in the flow of it, and you might relate to this, can be therapeutic.